In episode 26, titled Align with Digital Identity Guidance, the focus is sharpening identity practices so they match modern federal direction rather than a patchwork of local habits. Digital identity is the gateway to every sensitive function, which means small gaps compound into big exposures when systems, applications, and administrators each interpret requirements differently. The good news is that current guidance is practical. Prove who the user is at the right strength, authenticate them with robust factors, federate trust cleanly, and manage sessions and lifecycle with discipline. When those moves are specified clearly and enforced centrally, identity becomes an enabler rather than a bottleneck, and audits turn into demonstrations of consistency rather than scavenger hunts. A sound program begins by clarifying three responsibilities: identity proofing, authentication, and federation. Identity proofing establishes that a person is who they claim to be before any credentials are issued, and it includes the evidence checked, the fraud controls used, and the record of the decision. Authentication is the ongoing act of proving control of credentials each time access is requested, and it must resist common attack classes rather than simply meet a checkbox. Federation connects your systems to trusted identity providers so that one strong identity can be accepted across boundaries under defined conditions. By naming which team owns each responsibility and what evidence each step must produce, you prevent overlap and, more importantly, prevent gaps where no one quite owns the risk. Assurance levels translate risk into concrete requirements the whole organization can follow. Identity proofing is set to a level that matches the harm if an impersonator passes, while authenticator strength is aligned to the sensitivity of the actions a user can perform after login. Many programs use a three-tier structure for both proofing and authentication so that routine customer self-service does not demand the same rigor as administrative access to mission-critical systems. The key is mapping assurance to user roles, not just applications, because a single person may hold multiple roles with different privileges. When these mappings are documented, exceptions become visible, and the program can justify stronger controls where the blast radius is largest. Requiring multi-factor authentication for privileged and remote access is no longer controversial. It is the floor. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, combines something the user knows, has, or is, and for sensitive roles, the has factor should be strong enough to survive modern phishing and replay tactics. Privileged roles include administrators of identity platforms, cloud consoles, and production systems, but also application owners who can grant or expand privileges indirectly. Remote access stretches the trust boundary and deserves the same rigor, whether it arrives through virtual private networks, zero-trust access brokers, or application gateways. When the requirement is explicit, enforced in policy, and measured, it stops being a slogan and becomes a guardrail. Where feasible, phishing-resistant authenticators should be the preferred path because they tie authentication to the legitimate website or application and to the user's device. Technologies such as Fast Identity Online 2, FIDO2, Platform or Roaming Web Authentication, WebAuthn, Personal Identity Verification, PIV, and Common Access Card, CAC, reduce the chance that a well-crafted lure can steal credentials or replay a token elsewhere. Even when legacy systems require passwords, pairing them with a phishing-resistant second factor dramatically raises the attacker's cost. A practical rollout begins with administrators and other high-value roles, then moves to broader populations as application readiness and user devices catch up. Documented exceptions must be time-bounded and tracked to closure so that temporary does not become the new baseline. Federation extends trust safely when it is set up with contracts, metadata hygiene, and monitoring. Security Assertion Markup Language SAML and OpenID Connect OIDC can both work well if assertions are scoped to least privilege and if the receiving application validates signatures, issuers, audiences, and token lifetimes correctly. Contracts or interagency agreements should bind identity providers to uptime, incident reporting, attribute quality, and revocation responsiveness. Attribute release should adhere to data minimization, sending only what the application needs for authorization. Crucially, federation must be tested for fail-secure behavior so that clock drift, certificate rollover, or metadata errors do not silently switch the door to open. When federation is engineered like a control, not a convenience, it scales without surprise. Session management is where many otherwise strong programs leak risk. Timeouts should balance usability with exposure, which means shorter windows for high-privilege consoles and longer windows for low-risk read-only portals. Reauthentication triggers should fire on sensitive actions like privilege elevation, policy changes, or bulk data export, even if the login session remains fresh. Idle limits must consider background jobs and service accounts so that human sessions age out predictably while non-interactive workloads use tokens with narrow scopes and explicit expirations. Token replay should be discouraged with audience and nonce checks, and session termination should propagate promptly across devices when users sign out or roles change. Treating sessions as first-class controls closes a door that attackers regularly test. Identity lifecycle is the slow beat that either keeps your directory clean or fills it with ghosts. Onboarding should tie to proofing outcomes, role assignment rules, and an approval that leaves an auditable trail. Changes, department moves, promotions, or project assignments must follow a workflow that adds and removes entitlements symmetrically rather than accreting access forever. Termination is a timed dance. Disable, revoke, and rotate quickly, then archive records according to policy. Recertification keeps the map accurate by asking owners to confirm that current access remains necessary and proportionate. Systems with sensitive functions should require more frequent reviews and automatic removal when owners do not respond. When lifecycle is clear, you can defend every entitlement and deprovision cleanly without drama. A common risk appears when multi-factor authentication enforcement differs across applications and administrative paths. Users may face strong authentication at the primary portal but enjoy weaker routes through legacy admin consoles, mobile application programming interfaces, or temporary support backdoors. Attackers look for these seams, and so do auditors. The fix begins with discovery, an inventory of all authentication surfaces and administrative entry points, followed by a policy decision that no privileged path skirts the standard. Central dashboards should report policy coverage to reveal pockets of noncompliance, while change management should prevent new exceptions from appearing without review. Consistency is a control by itself because it reduces the attack surface created by convenience. A fast improvement is to centralize policy at the identity provider and enforce it everywhere sessions begin. Conditional access rules at the provider can check device posture, network conditions, risk indicators, and user role before granting tokens, which keeps decision logic in one place and reduces application-by-application drift. Where applications cannot honor centralized policy, enforcement can be pushed into access brokers, reverse proxies, or gateways that mediate sessions and inject the needed controls. The point is to express identity policy once, prove it centrally, and measure it continuously, so that exceptions are contained and retiring legacy paths becomes a program with milestones rather than a wish. Before moving on, it helps to hold a compact mental model that keeps the pieces straight. First, proofing establishes identity quality at the start. Second, multi-factor authentication, MFA, provides strong, repeatable login assurance. Third, federation lets you reuse that assurance without duplicating accounts. Fourth, session controls tie authentication to ongoing behavior. And fifth, lifecycle keeps entitlements aligned to real jobs over time. That sequence is not theory. It is how most incidents unfold when identity is weak, and it is how most audits conclude when identity is strong. When teams share that model, discussions stay grounded and trade-offs become transparent. Consider a contractor access scenario that touches several of these elements at once. Contractors arrive through federation with their employer's trusted identity provider, with an agreement that defines proofing level, authenticator strength, and incident communication. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, is mandatory and phishing-resistant for administrative tasks, while standard roles use approved factors documented in the risk assessment. Roles are time-bounded and scoped tightly to the work statement, with just-in-time elevation for break-fix activities that logs every action. Sessions expire more quickly for contractor accounts, and reauthentication is required at each elevation step. When the contract ends or the individual rolls off, federation trust is updated, tokens are revoked, and access is verified as removed in a measured window. This is alignment in motion rather than on paper. A memory hook keeps the core flow easy to recall. Proof, authenticate, authorize, manage sessions, deprovision. Proof establishes who is at the door. Authenticate proves it each time. Authorize grants only what is needed. Manage sessions keeps the proof fresh and bounded. Deprovision removes access promptly when circumstances change. If that 5-step loop runs cleanly, most identity problems shrink to manageable exceptions rather than systemic weaknesses. It is simple enough to repeat and specific enough to guide configuration reviews without wandering into buzzwords. To close, the alignment is set when responsibilities are named, assurance is mapped to risk, multi-factor authentication, MFA, and phishing-resistant options are enforced where they matter most, federation is disciplined, sessions are governed, and lifecycle stays current. The next action is concrete and contained. Review identity configurations for one high-value application and its administrative services, confirm that central policy is applied end-to-end, and record any exceptions with owners and due dates. When that cycle runs weekly across the portfolio, identity becomes predictable, traceable, and proportionate to risk, and that is exactly what modern digital guidance intends. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.